That, I suppose, makes me think a bit more about the students and attending to the students' needs. And I've spoken to a lot of teachers who believe in the importance of developing empathy with their students. I imagine you think that's a good thing as well.
Of course, yeah. And by developing empathy, we of course mean putting ourselves in the shoes of the learner. And the very obvious way to do that is to put yourself in a language lesson, in a language class as a learner. So as language teachers, we all need to also be learners of language if we're going to do our job effectively. And many of us have in our lives spent time on the other side of the classroom as students, as language learners. Now, this could be a long process. So, for example, in my case, I've learned Russian and Italian to advanced levels. And so I understand the process of language learning at different levels and the challenges that I faced as a learner in those contexts. And of course, every learner will be different. But we can even get a very good taste of what the learners are going through and what they're feeling by undergoing a very short course of language learning. And this is something you could do locally before you start a course such as the CertTESOL. But luckily the CertTESOL itself actually requires course providers to give learners that experience. So learners will undergo 4 hours of instruction in a foreign language. Instruction is the formal term. What will actually happen is they should have interactive, fun, enjoyable lessons. And it will usually be a language that none of the learners know in advance. So, for example, on CertTESOL courses that I ran here in the UK, if none of the learners spoke Russian, then the language that I would teach them would be Russian as a foreign language.
So there'd be no one speaks Russian, and then you're just teaching them Russian for a number of hours, and to help them experience what it's like just to be surrounded with the language they don't understand.
Absolutely. And it also provides them with an insight into how you would go about teaching a language, teaching English to learners who speak a language that you don't know. And this is something that language teachers sometimes find themselves doing. So if you're teaching internationally, for example, you may have completed a course like the CertTESOL and you apply for and get a job in, say, Japan. And then the group of learners you're given, they may be very low-level beginners, and you may need to try to teach them English without speaking any Japanese. Now, many of us would argue that your ability to teach them English is significantly enhanced if you do understand their language, their needs, and if you can even communicate it to them in that language. So many of us today are advocating strongly for the use of the learner's language in the classroom. But one of the challenges of being an internationally qualified language teacher is that you need to be able to cope with all those situations. And having experience learning a foreign language in that situation, you will see the skills that the teacher uses to make things like meaning clear, to make context clear, and to check that the learners have understood and can use the language that's been taught. That will all hopefully come through on the unknown language element of the CertTESOL.
Yeah, thanks. That's really interesting, and I, especially as you mentioned the kind of international element of being an internationally qualified teacher and having to react to so many different situations, and also institutional needs, which, as you say, may require you not to use the first language of the students, but maybe that might be okay, and as you say, it's a nice resource to use.